2005, EA acquired two studios to add to their repertoire of developers: BioWare and Pandemic Studios. The former was already known for their genre-defining games like Knights of the Old Republic, Baldur's Gate, and Neverwinter Nights. The latter focused exclusively on making middle-market games that didn't really push boundaries in technology or development, but were one thing for certain: fun. Mercenaries' Playground of Destruction was the accessible GTA clone that you could easily convince your parents to get for you. No, Mom, I'm not playing as a gang member. I'm a mercenary for hire, saving the world from North Korea. Destroy All Humans was the quirky 50s B-movie monster game where you can lay waste to the world and collect brains for the future of an alien race. And of course, the main reason why EA snatched them up: Star Wars Battlefront. The mega successful hit that allowed fans to fight in the front lines in the Star Wars universe as the faceless drones outside of the spotlight. The franchise being so good, two mainline games were made by Pandemic, along with two PSP games developed by Rebellion, and even a mobile game by THQ. But if you ask anyone, it was either Battlefront 1 or more likely Battlefront 2, with combined sales at the 10 million mark. EA was banking on both of these studios to draw in their dedicated and loyal fan bases into the next generation. BioWare would push forward to make Dragon Age and Mass Effect, drawing in millions more in sales, creating mega franchises that last to this very day. Whereas Pandemic didn't. The first EA-published Pandemic game was Mercenaries 2: World in Flames. I love that game, so much that it was the first game I did a video on in this format. But I love it for all the wrong reasons. The buggy nature, the idiotic AI, and the lack of overall polish makes the game simply dumb fun. And that's okay. But where Mercs 2 was dumb fun, in the same year it came out, we got the first Mass Effect, setting up an expansive and grand space epic with tense and thrilling combat to boot, brimmed with character and set-piece moments that drew in the player with endless ideas. The next year, Pandemic would try again, though this time with The Lord of the Rings Conquest. Co-developed alongside Weta Digital, it was essentially Battlefront in Tolkien's fantasy epic. And it was a disaster. At this point, EA was done with the Los Angeles studio, announcing the closure of Pandemic by the end of 2009. However, Pandemic was contracted to launch 3 games, and the team was going to make sure that the Saboteur was going to be Pandemic's swan song. When a studio shuts down, it is uncommon for their last game to be considered one of their best, let alone a good game, either due to a lack of sales, experience, lack of updates, misdirection, or simply being a pump and dump or asset flip. The Saboteur, however, did not meet the same fate. In fact, to this day, aside from the Battlefront games, it is considered one of their greatest games. I'm definitely a part of that crowd, as compared to Pandemic's other games, it is the most serious in tone and nature, with a couple of caveats. What makes its place in history so interesting was that it wasn't something conveyed during Pandemic's days aligned with EA, but during the days of Mercenaries 1. In 2021, a leaked build was uploaded to YouTube showing what the game was aiming to be. Built using the original Zero engine, the prototype showed the same ideas of a rogue agent fighting against Nazis in World War II in occupied France. Although instead of Sean Devlin as our protagonist, the prototype has William Grover Williams, who was a real person. A race car driver and winner of the very first Monaco Grand Prix in 1929, Williams served as an agent for the SOE in World War II. The prototype also featured quite an array of advancements, including more detailed destructible environments, a new hijacking system, and exhilarating car chases. These were quite the advanced systems compared to what the developer had in the past, some of which were used in Mercs 2. What the team really wanted to focus on was making the map feel as close to the real thing as possible. Streets made of cobblestone, the snaking river, and the iconic grand landmarks. Even the countryside had to go through extensive research to get the mood of it just right. The biggest challenge for the team was the color. The game's most recognized feature was the use of black and white and color to signify who's in power. Art director Chris Hunt describes countless conceptualizations, including 2D and 3D prototypes, camera angles, and tweaking the graphics engine to capture that noir-like style. And for a while, that's all the background information I could find. Surprisingly, a lot of development history behind the Saboteur is pretty obscured. Many of the interviews of the time had some details, but they were pretty threadbare since it was during the studio's push to market the game. It's interesting to read how much the studio wanted to make a game like this, but we're not getting the Psychonauts 1 level of development history. Something felt off about the game even before the game was released. Just listen to the voice acting of the initial reveal trailer compared to the final product.
There are few things in this world that are sacred to me. My friends, my car, and my women. But if you hurt any of those things, pray God finds you. Before I do.
We aren't. But if you're keen to get your teeth kicked in, I'll be happy to oblige.
We'll get into the voice acting in a bit, but the initial Sean sounds more like a real Irishman. So, I kept digging. For something, anything that could paint a better perspective. And thankfully, I found something. This is Morgan Jaffet. He appeared on the Game Hugs podcast hosted by Guy Bloomberg a few years ago to discuss and share his history in the industry. By far, though, the most interesting part was when he was talking about his time at Pandemic. Jaffet was brought in early 2009, right when EA announced Pandemic's closing. According to him, the studio was in a weird state of anxiety. Decisions were not being properly made or followed through, always being handed off or even playing the blame game. It got so bad, EA would constantly be stepping in to ram in a decision whether the team wanted it or not. He only worked there for about a week to do some mild development work, and left once he caught wind of the, quote, smell of death. What's stranger was that he was supposed to be doing more. Pandemic had grand ideas for multiple DLCs to expand the Saboteur even more. They were even creating early concepts for a sequel, with Jaffet being the creative director. But the EA process was deep into the infection. Jaffet saw the writing on the walls and bailed. The fact that the Saboteur even launched in this state with all the chaos going on at the time is a miracle. And so, the final Pandemic game would be set for launch in December 2009. The Saboteur shares so much of Pandemic's former titles, yet feels completely different to those games at the same time. It presents itself as a more serious title. In games like Mercs and Destroy All Humans, you feel powerful the moment you enter the map. Not here. Oppression is a significant force. From the very moment you step out from La Belle, you are surrounded by Nazi paraphernalia, and of course, black and white. There's sniper and loudspeaker towers overlooking the city, zeppelins patrolling the skies, soldiers walking on the streets. Hell, even in La Belle, there are Nazis everywhere splurging on their conquest. Color is a storytelling element that I really appreciate in any media. It can invoke feelings of calm, joy, freedom, sadness, anger, all sorts of emotion. Many games do this really well, though the Saboteur stands out because it's not a filter, but a dynamic as you play. Entering the black and white zones, the Nazis are in full control. They're more active on the streets, harassing and even executing civilians. The weather is much moodier, where you can't tell if it's night or day, with many thunder and rainstorms. The only other major color you see here is red. Red on the Nazi flags, swastikas, armbands of soldiers, blood spilled on the ground. Even their vehicles have a more menacing presence in the colorless regions as they appear darker. But there is hope. Sometimes glints of blue to indicate resistance members can be spotted, but will not stand up in these areas due to the insurmountable presence the Nazis have. This is where Sean Devlin comes in. Sean is a mechanic and racing driver for the Vittore Racing Group. He and his best friend Jules, Jules' sister Veronique, and Moroni Vittore are about to travel from France to the border town of Saarbrücken for the Grand Prix. Unfortunately, it's the late 30s and the Nazis are in full swing. When they arrive, they are unwelcomingly greeted by Kurt Dierker, who has only come out of retirement to race for the Mercedes, Doppelsieg Motorworks team. As Sean is about to win the race, Dierker performs a Max Verstappen and cheats his way to victory. Sean and Jules try to get revenge, only to be caught and learn that Dierker is actually deeply involved in the Nazi army. Believing Sean and Jules are British spies, he ends up murdering Jules. Sean escapes, and as he does, Germany quickly swoops in and invades all of France. Being stuck in occupied territory, Sean must fight back with the resistance and exact revenge on Dierker. You are a saboteur, and you do saboteur things. While you are only one man versus an entire war machine, you have so much in your arsenal to mess with the invading forces. Dynamite, weapons, even your own hands are tools of destruction that make a significant impact on France. The more that you do, the more you will have areas regain their color, where the resistance are more active and will fight back against any Nazi that is unfortunate to come their way. One thing I like about Sean is that he's a bit on the schlubbier side. You can climb buildings and shoot guns, but Sean isn't necessarily good at doing either. There's a clumsiness to the way he grabs ledges and scales buildings, and while he can use weapons, he's not a soldier and isn't properly trained in using them. At least he can aim down sights significantly better than any mercenary. But Sean will get overwhelmed very quickly if he's not careful. The Nazis are everywhere and will easily turn Sean into a pile of red goop if not careful. Having some sort of enter and exit plan can mean life or death. It's a visually impressive game in that regard. Going to a high place to admire the city in the mix of color and colorless zones is breathtaking. The landscape of France is a massive mix of tight Paris city street and vast French countryside. Even though the textures aren't the best for the time, and the bloom can be annoying, or some sort of weird graphical glitch could happen, it's still a nice game to look at. And littered about is a bunch of German crap that needs to be redesigned for zoning purposes. Now, I'm not showing everything in this game because there's a lot of burlesque going on. It's classy, but YouTube might suppress this video if I'm not careful. Just know that it's here, and yes, you can turn on and off the nudity.
Oh, that's more like it. Put the kiddies to bed already. Right, now we're in business. Come on, you can always go to the confession when you're done playing.
This is a pandemic game. Of course the explosions are satisfying. There are so many ways to tackle an objective. You could grab yourself a disguise and line a base full of RDX explosives, take a step back and watch as the entire base gets reduced to rubble. You could just run in, guns blazing, with some resistance members. This is harder, as Sean isn't really the strongest person in the world, and he can be shot in every single direction, land or air. See a turret? Why not use it? Have a car and some dynamite? That's like wine and cheese to a French freedom fighter. The amount of ways you can tackle objectives is vast and keeps things incredibly fresh. And while you are powerful, you're not invincible or unending. You do have to plan for when things could go wrong. Once you're spotted, you'll have to work fast. Hell, even the car chases can be intense. They don't give up, and they will keep upgrading their arsenal to end you. half-tracks full of heavily armed storm soldiers with flamethrowers and rapid-fire machine guns, experimental tanks with twin cannons, even sending in not just the Zeppelins, but the Luftwaffe as well. It is incredibly silly and fun when, essentially, the entire occupying force of France is coming after you and you can't hide aside from a few places. At least until you unlock the perk where it allows you to hide at any of the hiding spots in Alarm 5. As you play, you can unlock perks as well. These are not just minor stat boosts. These can range from the aforementioned being able to hide anywhere during a level 5 alarm, carrying more explosives, getting new experimental weapons, and being able to store and call in heavy armor as a getaway vehicle. You can also get some really handy upgrades from the black market. Like when you call in your getaway vehicle, you can have a salesman deliver it, so if you need more ammo or swap out guns, you can do that right then and there. Or if you want to call in a group of resistance members to back you up, you can upgrade their health and armaments. The OST is solid. A lot of moody jazz and French accordion to emphasize the gloom of the situation. It's not all doom and gloom though. The action music is intense. There's a guy just going nuts on the bongos, and there's even some licensed music to perfectly fit this setting. It may not be an OST I personally would listen to on my phone, but it fits the setting nicely. One thing I can really appreciate about this game is the amount of freedom. Not just in the way you play or tackle objectives, but the whole map is accessible to you from the very moment you complete the prologue. Pandemic learned from Mercs 2 that players really hated being locked out of areas of the map because
we're trying to tell a story. Going over here would ruin it.
It won't be easy, as there's checkpoints where to make things easier, you could present papers. But if you don't have those papers, even though the Saboteur is one of Pandemic's most polished games, there are some oddities and faults with it. This game has ragdoll physics, which is very fun, but there are times where shit like this happens. Or this. It's weird, but it is funny. The explosions are satisfying, like I mentioned, though the vehicle explosions are downgraded compared to Mercs 2. Not much in the way of bits and pieces flying off. The weapons are varied and fun to use, but the sound of them is pretty weak. This is where years and years of playing other shooters have dramatically shifted my perspective of gun sounds. But just listen to how weak these guns can be. The only one that sounds truly terrifying to me is the Terror SMG. I mean, it's amazing what Sean can fit into his satchel bag. From roughly hundreds of pounds of dynamite to a fucking Panzerschreck. Or even a flamethrower. And not just the gun sounds, but even the cars are a bit weird. They can be nice to drive and I love the variety. I am a huge sucker for the caskets on wheels. But their engine notes are the same, and for some reason, shifting sounds awful on some cars. Like as if Sean is actively trying to explode the clutch and transmission. Sometimes if you go fast enough, then the car turns into an EV. There's also the in-game economy. Contraband is how transactions are done. You can get it by finding resistance-labeled crates, blowing up Nazi installations, killing generals, and completing missions. But if you want to literally have everything sooner rather than later, or if you're just short on silenced pistol ammo, there's a pretty game-breaking and pandemic-esque cheese that you can do to get money somewhat fast. Step 1. Find an AA turret that is high above the ground. Step 2. Secure said turret. Step 3. Spin around in circles and blow up zeppelins. They will drop 50 contraband per kill. They spawn fast and they take only one shot to destroy. Once you get to Alarm 5, the Nazis will send in every damn Zep they have, as well as the ME-109s, which can drop 100 contraband per kill. You can do this for 10 minutes and end up having over 4,000 contraband. But if you're worried about the ground troops, depending on which turret you use, even when you're actively firing, they will completely ignore you. They only get aggroed if you shoot at them. If you die, you'll only lose your equipped weapons, but keep whatever contraband you collected. I do enjoy the main characters quite a lot, but the voice acting is a bit of a mixed bag. One of the biggest complaints I remember from the time is the voice of our Irish racing driver protagonist, Sean Devlin. He is voiced by the Medic. No, I'm serious.
We had a deal. I brought your box halfway across France, and I had to kill a lot of men to do it. Now I want Dierker.
Most hearts couldn't withstand this voltage. But I'm fairly certain your heart...
I don't mind it too much, but there are times where it comes off as pretty comical. Like Sean does the gruff guy accent with the Irish mixed in, and it's strange. Actually, almost every major male character does the gruff voice thing.
Are you working alone?
Aye.
I'm sorry to hear that.
You know better than to bring strangers here. Friends. They need a place to lay low for a few days. This is not an hotel.
Nor a brothel. Oh, feeling a touch homesick, are we, darling?
Ah, an English aristocrat. Does your father know you are here, girl?
I expect he's too busy buggering the chambermaids.
Would you trade your own life for his?
Aye, gladly.
Then you are a fool. Only gravediggers profit from such madness.
Jules is owed a debt.
There's no button to lock into cover. Sean automatically snaps to cover, which works most of the time but can be cumbersome other times. Driving feels good for the most part, but handbrake turns do something to the car's physics. I don't know how to describe it other than the car magically gets made into magnets. And there are times where the game uses pre-rendered cutscenes, which look okay, but then they'll use them for the most mundane of scenes. One of the most hilarious, I'm presuming unintentional issues is with the trains. I found this one that was sneaking up on some broken track, which was kind of weird. But at one point, you can blow up train bridges in exchange for contraband, as well as a perk requirement. It's fun and can be tackled however you see fit, but when you blow up the bridge, the trains will still use it. That's more advanced than the train in the New Order. Still, the Saboteur is a great game for its gameplay and its odd moments. It's intense, action-packed, the freedom of the way you can play is extremely entertaining, but go deeper and you see the cracks, especially if you look at the story. Sean Devlin, Irish, haunted, brute, a man with a foggy history, running off to France to become a mechanic and driver. He has a history that can only be piecemealed by bits of dialogue throughout the events of the game. Angered by the cheater, Sean and Jules enact revenge, only to be caught, learning that Dierker has other hobbies not involving racing. Jules is butchered, and Sean flees to save Veronique and Vittore and hide out in Nazi-occupied Paris at the La Belle Gentlemen's Club owned by Veronique's parents. While wallowing away in drink and temporary company, Sean is approached by the resistance leader Luke, and is reinvigorated to enact revenge on the bastards that killed Jules. What I have done is explain the prologue of the plot reversed. You meet Luke and blow up a fuel depot first before attending the Saarbrücken Grand Prix. It's not the worst intro in the world, but I've always had this feeling that it's a bit undercooked. It's somewhat persistent with the game's story. I'm always one that likes the writing style of show and tell because it develops a better connection to the piece. When you only rely on telling the player that so-and-so happens, there's a disconnect. Thankfully, this isn't a Days Gone situation, but I do wish there was something like a cutscene or something to illustrate Sean's past rather than being told about it in these over-the-shoulder cutscenes. There are only teases of Sean's past, which are only revealed by this one sentence by SOE agent Bishop.
Perhaps that's because you're a wanted fugitive in your own country. I see you made quite a number of enemies back home. Quite a resume for a man your age.
Well, what are you then? Scotland Yard?
Not quite. Of course, we know about your father as well. Tell me, did you ever find out who started the fire?
Who the fuck are you people?
We are a dagger at the enemy's throat, and the time has come to start cutting.
Or even the connection between Vittore and Sean. How did they meet? Why do they have this bond? Moments like these just make me want to know more. I can only assume this might be because of EA shutting down and cutting funding from the studio during the Saboteur's development. You can feel in these story moments that Pandemic is just itching to explain and show more. If you were just to beeline through the main story missions, you can probably beat the game in the matter of a couple hours. The thought of this game having 1 or 2 proper DLC expansions is ringing more and more true. I do like Sean's arc though. The sole motivation for getting back at the Nazis and Dierker is not because they're evil or wanting France liberated. He just really fucking hates Dierker for cheating the race and killing Jules. And these assholes are getting in his way and are a threat to Veronique and Vittore. Only through seeing what these people actually do to others, leaning into the ear of the noble but flawed Luke, and realizing how grand of a threat and pure evil the Nazis are, he then changes tune. Willing to put his life on the line not just because of revenge for his losses, but for the future of the world. And it's not just Sean that I like. A lot of the characters here are for the most part pretty well written. Vittore acts like a father to Sean, at first loathing Sean's vendetta.
Dierker's still breathing.
So what? Would you trade your own life for his?
Aye, gladly.
Then you are a fool. Only grave diggers profit from such madness.
Jules is owed a debt. I'd see it paid in full.
This isn't about Jules. Have you forgotten why you had to flee Ireland in the night? Have you forgotten what happened to your father? You, of all people, know the price of revenge. How much it costs the people we love. I took you into my home. Made a better life for you. You have no right to throw it away.
But then warming up to it just because of how much the Nazis are ruining everyone's lives. Skylar is smart and sassy, with a touch of mystery to her background.
Brother, let's go, Jules.
You're making mistakes, Sean.
When did you become the voice of prudence?
Dierker isn't who you think he is.
Oh, he's not a motherless arse-faced knob jockey.
He's dangerous, Sean. Let it go.
Bishop is imposing and full of secrecy. Sean not really fully understanding what the British government has planned. Dierker is kind of generic, but not to the point where I'm completely upset with him. He's imposing, sadistic, and cunning.
Guten Abend, Herr Morini. Always a pleasure to welcome one of our Italian friends to the fatherland. I was just speaking of my admiration for General Mussolini. A kindred spirit to our own Führer. Your country is fortunate to have such a leader, yeah?
Racing is my passion. I find little time for politics.
Sometimes racing is politics.
No. There is a difference.
You must forgive my ignorance, Herr Morini. We Germans are a simple people. Perhaps you would enlighten us further?
There's a depth to a majority of these side characters that has not been shown in a Pandemic game prior. But I will say, during this playthrough, some of these plot points are fucking strange. For example, when Sean gets involved with the British, they want him to secure a box at the Paris cemetery. What's inside the box is a mystery. I don't know if they were trying to go for a Raiders reference, or since the topic of atomic weapons is a major element in the plot, maybe it was uranium or Nazi gold. It's never really brought up again. The relationship between Veronique and Sean is beyond unfinished. Her sole motivation is to serve with the resistance, not just to avenge Jules, but understanding the greater danger of the Nazi threat to the world, not just France. She's willing to risk her life the same way that Luke does. Yet we barely interact with her. There are a grand total of 4 missions involving her directly. Otherwise, she's just in the background, and Sean is treating her like a little girl. They don't really share a connection other than being connected to Jules and both being roped into the resistance. But Sean does a hell of a lot more than Veronique, just saying. This could have also been a DLC plan, but we probably won't ever know. All I know is that fucking kiss is so undeserved. Though Veronique does have one great moment.
Are you out of your fucking mind? You know what will happen if they take me alive. You have seen Dierker's methods firsthand. In the end, I will tell them everything. You must not let that happen. I can't do this.
Compassion is a luxury we can no longer afford. The enemy we face has none.
I love this. It's the one time where, despite her doing some small-time terrorist bombings, this is where Veronique understands Luke's teachings. To not be afraid and to do what's necessary for freedom. And then it gets undone when Sean kisses her. And because of the development hell going on, there are other stories and characters that will never be truly fulfilled, like General Karl Eckhart. He's apparently the supreme military commander overseeing the occupation of France. He's also followed by his ultra-tough bodyguard Franziska. These two are the ones that apprehend Sean and Jules in the beginning of the game, but aside from glimpses here and there, they're not really anything major to the story. Yeah, Eckhart steals the Aurora, but there's no other direct interaction with him that ever happens. I get that the focus was on Dierker, but these two are a major part as well, only to be, theoretically, killed when Sean partakes in the Paris Grand Prix. It's not all bad moments. A lot of the main story missions are fun and interesting in their own regard, like when Sean is saving the German scientist Kessler on the armored train, or when Sean and the Resistance are holding out against a major attack by the black market trader Santiago. He spelled out his intentions very early on, but it makes sense with his arc. After all,
I am a capitalist.
I don't give a pig's arse what you call yourself.
By far, the best moments are between Sean and Dierker. He's imposing, animalistic, and always toying with Devlin, either directly or indirectly. But even his methods to other Nazis are too much. In a way, Devlin and Dierker are the same. Even though Nazis aren't human, he too has lost his own humanity to survive in this hellish existence. This is really shown at the finale in the Eiffel Tower. Dierker has completely lost it as Paris turns into a complete war zone. Rattled by Sean's feats to undermine the Nazis, Dierker goes on a complete rampage, slaughtering his own generals and stringing up a new chandelier. Those who were spared are so distraught they question their own ethics. It's a grand moment when Dierker is finished off.
One day, history will thank us for what we have done. Holding back the mongrel hordes while you people cowered in our shadow. You could never understand the burden of my duty.
Killing you could never make up for what I've lost. My friends will still be dead, and I'll still have to live with the things I've done.
Is that why you're here? Did you think that by killing me, you could wash the blood from your own hands? That's tragic. We are going to hell, aren't we, Irishman?
The one thing that sticks out is Sean's final words.
Is it over?
No, it's not over. I'm just getting started.
Even though he says it with a smirk, there's a cold deadness in his eyes, similar to Veronique's after killing Luke. When he starts killing Nazis, he gets some level of joy, but only to end on this note, realizing his own atrocities. This could be because the animation budget was limited, but there's room to interpret that Sean is as cold and shallow as the man that upended his life. Whatever emotion or sympathy he had in the beginning has been completely wiped. Or maybe I'm looking too deep, I don't know. It's a solid ending. And even though Pandemic had plans to have this become a whole new series, I'm happy it never did. I just don't see how it would work in the same way. You could play Sean or whatever character they had planned for the sequel in another occupied city, but France being considered one of the birthplaces of modern democracy is significant to what you're fighting against. The Saboteur, to this day, despite all the flaws it has, is still considered a cult classic and a beloved title from Pandemic. It's just a fun action game with some interesting plot points, a gripping presentation, and really entertaining and near limitless ways of dealing with Nazis. The heart, soul, and passion that the team at Pandemic had really shows in this title alone. It makes me wonder what if Conquest never happened, or if BioWare and Mass Effect faltered and Pandemic soared, or if EA never acquired them in the first place. Not necessarily sticking around with the sinking ships that were THQ and LucasArts, but going in the direction of Rebellion. That's a studio that has been around for years, self-publishing and developing pretty decent games. Sniper Elite being their biggest franchise by far, and still going strong for the most part. But Pandemic was not making the best choices either. I loved this studio, but to ignore their downfalls would be unjust. Not being able to hold on to the rights of Destroy All Humans, Battlefront, and Mercenaries were massive mistakes. One would be run into the ground with terrible sequels, only to be brought back by way of remasters years later. Another would be stuck in licensing hell, only to launch with 2 games behind a legendary team, but middled with their own issues and controversies. And the last being a cult classic with fun elements and ideas, being held back by an aging engine and lack of polish, with a third game fixing all of those issues and including new elements, to be cut short, leaving the world with a demo that no one will touch again. Even to this day, there is a Pandemic-shaped void in my heart. In an age where we live with AAA developers and publishers creating essentially the same crap over and over again, and non-AAA, AA? Whatever the right term is, studios pumping games that are actually worth a damn, I could see a Pandemic-like studio filling that void. Imagine a Mercenaries game made today with the same presentation and scale of the finals, Helldivers 2, or even the recent Wolfenstein games. That would be insane. Sure, Just Cause did some of what Mercs did, but that game didn't allow you to level an entire city for the fuck of it. The tools are out there. Someone can fill that void. Who's it gonna be? Only time will tell. So, this video took longer than I thought, but that's okay. I've wanted to make something on the Saboteur for a while, and this seemed like the right time. Because in the next video, I'm going to be venting. Old man yelling at the sky sort of angry. Till then, game you're most excited for that's coming out in 2024. Space Marine 2, Shadow of the Erdtree, Hell, Blade 2, and Angerfoot. There's probably more out there that I'm interested in, but I'm waiting to see what will really grab my attention. Like I mentioned in my last video, I was nervous for 2024, and that's been proven true in the scope of AAA, but we'll see. What is the IP crossover that will get you into a game that you haven't played? Well, I have been playing a ton of Helldivers 2, and it has me somewhat interested in playing the original. I've checked out the original Fallout games thanks to post-Fallout 3. This is a tough one. Maybe a new single-player Warcraft game? That will never happen. Modern Blizzard, though hopefully with the Microsoft acquisition they'll make better games, but I doubt it, relies heavily on World of Warcraft to the point where making some other game in that universe makes no sense. Though to be honest, even if the Warcraft IP had a single-player, third-person action game made nowadays, it wouldn't make me want to check out WoW.